You know, when they appoint some cardinal in some diocese and he's been covering up for like people who are child, you know, like Theodore McCarrick or Cardinal Wuerl or those kind of guys. I mean,
Or the Pope.
yes.
What if the most controversial film of the 21st century was hiding a message so personal, so confrontational, that it took 20 years and one podcast conversation for anyone to finally hear it? Mel Gibson told Joe Rogan the truth, and Rogan could not speak.
I thought was very strange. There was like Hollywood resistance to that movie. Like people didn't like that you were making it. It seemed like.
Yeah, there was a lot of opposition.
Here is what nobody talks about. The Passion of the Christ made over $600 million. It became one of the highest grossing R-rated films in history. It divided critics, outraged an industry, and moved millions of viewers to tears. But the conversation never got past the surface. For 2 decades, every discussion about this film circled the same topics: the violence, the controversy, the backlash. Nobody asked the real question. Nobody asked what Gibson actually buried inside this film, what it was designed to do to the audience on a level most people never consciously recognized. Then Gibson sat down with Joe Rogan, and he finally said it out loud. The film that should not exist. In 2004, Mel Gibson released a film that every major studio in Hollywood had refused to touch. He was an Oscar-winning director, a bankable star, a man who could greenlight almost anything with a phone call. And yet, when he brought this project to the table, the industry shut the door in his face. Not quietly, not politely. Phone calls stopped being returned. Meetings were canceled without explanation. Colleagues he had worked with for decades suddenly had nothing to say. The message was unmistakable. This story was not welcome, and neither was the man trying to tell it. Gibson wanted to make a film about the final 12 hours of Jesus Christ's life, not a sanitized version, not a Sunday school retelling. He wanted the audience to feel every moment of it, the weight, the blood, the cost. Hollywood had made biblical epics before, grand, sweeping spectacles with golden lighting and orchestral scores. Safe, predictable, comfortable. Gibson was not interested in comfortable. He was a devout Catholic. This was not a career move. It was a calling. And when the studios walked away, he did something almost unheard of. He funded the entire production himself. $30 million of his own money, no safety net, no fallback plan. If the film failed, he would lose everything. He made it anyway.
He was a really valuable asset, really put himself out there, gave everything he had. The guy lost 50 pounds during production.
A language the world forgot. Gibson made a decision that stunned everyone around him. He would shoot the entire film in Aramaic and Latin, 2 dead languages, no subtitles and early cuts, no concessions to modern audiences. From a commercial standpoint, it was suicide. No major film had ever attempted anything like it. Studio executives called it career-ending arrogance. Critics predicted an unwatchable disaster, but Gibson was not making a business decision. He was making a theological one. He believed that hearing the actual words spoken in the actual time would bypass the audience's intellect and hit something deeper, something primal, something the modern world had been trained to ignore. He hired language consultants to reconstruct dialects that had not been spoken in over 1,000 years. Every line of dialogue was translated, rehearsed, corrected, and translated again. The actors had to learn not just the words, but the rhythm, the breath patterns, the emotional cadence of languages they had never heard before. Think about what that means for the audience. You sit in a dark theater. You cannot understand a single word. And yet, somehow you feel everything. The grief, the betrayal, the desperation. Gibson stripped away the comfort of familiar language and forced the viewer to experience the story the way a witness would have. Overwhelmed, disoriented, unable to look away. It was not arrogance. It was architecture. Every creative choice in this film was designed to do one thing: break through the walls that 2,000 years of retelling had built around this story. What the camera hid in plain sight. Most audiences watched The Passion of the Christ and saw a brutal, unflinching depiction of suffering. They were not wrong, but they were not seeing the whole film. Buried inside nearly every frame, Gibson planted layers of symbolic meaning that the average viewer was never meant to consciously notice. They were designed to work beneath the surface, to bypass logic and strike the subconscious. And when Gibson sat down with Rogan and began pulling these layers apart one by one, The scale of what he had hidden in this film became almost impossible to believe. The very first scene tells you everything. The Garden of Gethsemane. Darkness closing in. Jesus kneeling alone while his closest friends fall asleep around him. Then Satan appears, not with horns and fire, but as something almost beautiful, androgynous, calm, whispering doubt in a voice that sounds almost reasonable. A serpent crawls from beneath Satan's robe. Jesus sees it, and he crushes it under his heel. One gesture, one frame, and Gibson has connected the final hours of Christ's life directly to the first promise of redemption in Genesis, the very beginning and the very end, linked in a single silent moment that most viewers never even registered. Later, after the crucifixion, Jesus rests in Mary's arms. The composition is deliberate. It mirrors Michelangelo's Pieta almost exactly. Grief and grace held in the same frame. Gibson did not point these things out in the film. He never explained them in interviews. He buried them and waited 20 years for someone to ask the right questions. Rogan asked, things that cannot be explained. What happened on set during filming does not fit neatly into any rational framework. Jim Caviezel, the actor who portrayed Jesus, was not pretending to suffer. The cross he carried weighed over 150 pounds. During one take, it dislocated his shoulder completely. During the scourging scene, the whip struck him for real, twice, leaving his hands bleeding and raw. Then came something the crew still cannot explain. Assistant director John Michelini was struck by lightning, twice. Caviezel himself was reportedly hit during the crucifixion scene. He walked away unharmed. Lightning in biblical tradition is not random. It represents divine power, judgment, a sign that something beyond the human world is paying attention. The crew knew this, and it shook them. But the physical events were only part of it. Luca Lionello, the actor who played Judas Iscariot, arrived on set as an atheist. He had no religious background, no spiritual framework. He took the role because it was work. By the time production wrapped, he had converted. Months of inhabiting the psychology of betrayal and guilt had broken something open inside him that he could not close again. Maya Morgenstern, who played Mary, was secretly pregnant during filming. Nobody on set knew. A woman carrying new life, portraying a mother watching her son die. Life and death occupying the same body in the same frame. Coincidence does not explain these things, neither does logic. The cast and crew walked away from production believing they had participated in something that went far beyond filmmaking, something none of them could fully articulate, something that still follows them. The wall they built around it. Before a single ticket was sold, the backlash had already begun. Religious leaders who had previewed the script raised concerns about historical stereotypes. Critics questioned whether the film's intensity crossed a line. Media coverage fixated almost entirely on the controversy, turning every conversation into a debate about what the film might do wrong rather than what it was actually trying to say. And that noise, deliberate or not, became the perfect wall. It buried the deeper artistic and theological vision beneath an avalanche of outrage, opinion, and fear. For 20 years, the conversation about this film never moved past the surface. And that was the tragedy, not the criticism itself. Criticism is fair. Some of the concerns raised were legitimate and worth debating. But the debate consumed everything. It became the only lens through which anyone was allowed to discuss the film. Every interview, every review, every headline. The same handful of questions asked over and over again. Nobody asked about the symbolism. Nobody asked about the dead languages. Nobody asked why Gibson made the specific artistic choices he made, or what they were designed to do to the audience on a level deeper than plot. The controversy became a cage. Gibson could not talk about what the film actually meant, because every microphone shoved in his face demanded he defend what the film supposedly represented. The real conversation never happened. The deeper meaning sat untouched, locked behind a wall of noise that the industry had no interest in tearing down. For 2 decades, the film's true purpose stayed buried, hidden in plain sight. What Gibson actually told Rogan. Then Gibson sat down with Joe Rogan, and something shifted. The conversation started the way most Rogan interviews do, casual, loose, circling around familiar territory. But when Gibson began talking about the passion of the Christ, his tone changed. He stopped performing. He stopped deflecting. And he started saying things that most people in his position would never say publicly. He described the film not as a retelling of a historical event, but as a mirror, one designed to force every single viewer to confront their own role in what happened on that cross, not 2,000 years ago, right now. Rogan went quiet. This was not the usual celebrity interview. Gibson was not promoting a product. He was not deflecting with humor or rehearsed talking points. He was laying something bare, slowly, carefully, like a man who had been waiting 20 years for the right room to say it in. He told Rogan that the violence in the film was never gratuitous. Every lash, every blow, every frame of suffering was calibrated to make the audience feel responsible, not guilty in an abstract theological sense. Responsible in the way you feel when you witness something terrible and realize you cannot look away, because looking away is what caused it in the first place. Gibson said it plainly, we are all responsible for this. His sacrifice was for all mankind. That was the line that changed the room. Rogan, a man who has sat across from presidents, fighters, and whistleblowers, did not push back. He did not crack a joke. He did not redirect. He just listened, and millions of people listened with him. The meaning nobody was ready to hear. The hidden meaning of the Passion of the Christ was never about history. It was never about spectacle. It was never about proving a theological argument or converting skeptics in their seats. Gibson told Rogan the quiet part out loud, the entire point of the film. Every frame of violence, every second of agony, every deliberately unbearable moment was built around a single idea that most audiences were too overwhelmed to consciously register. That the suffering on screen was not something that happened to someone else. It was caused by everyone watching. That is why the film hurts. Not because the violence is extreme, not because the makeup is realistic. It hurts because Gibson engineered every second of it to make you feel like you were standing in that crowd, not as a spectator, as a participant. The dead languages remove your distance. The relentless pacing removes your escape. The symbolism works beneath your awareness. And by the time the credits roll, something has shifted inside you that you cannot name. Gibson did not make a film about what happened to Christ. He made a film about what Christ did for you, personally, specifically, whether you believe it or not. That distinction is everything, and it is the one thing nobody talked about for 20 years. The critics debated the violence, the media debated the controversy, the industry debated the box office. But the actual meaning, the reason Gibson spent $30 million and risked his entire career, sat in silence the whole time, waiting for someone to finally hear it. The Resurrection Project. Gibson is not finished. During the Rogan interview, he confirmed what rumors had suggested for years. A sequel is in development, but the word sequel does not begin to describe what he is planning. Gibson and screenwriter Randall Wallace have spent over 6 years crafting a film about the resurrection, not as a simple continuation, but as a cosmic narrative stretching from the fall of the angels to the death of the last apostle. He described it as the most ambitious project he has ever attempted, and that is saying something. This is the man who financed the Passion of the Christ out of his own pocket, the man who shot a blockbuster in dead languages, the man who stood alone against an industry that wanted this story erased. And now he says, the next project makes all of that look small. Gibson told Rogan that the resurrection is the single most important event in human history, not as a matter of faith, as a matter of evidence. He pointed to the apostles, 12 men who watched their leader die, then spent the rest of their lives proclaiming he had risen. Every single one of them was tortured, imprisoned, or executed for that claim. Not one recanted. Gibson asked Rogan a question that hung in the air long after he said it. Who dies for something they know is a lie? That question is the foundation of everything he is building next. A film designed not to preach, but to confront. To place the audience face to face with the most radical claim ever made and dare them to look away. He is betting everything, again. More than 2 decades after its release, the Passion of the Christ still refuses to be ignored. It still provokes. It still divides, and it still carries a meaning that most people have. Never fully confronted, Gibson did not make a safe film. He did not make a comfortable film. He made something designed to reach past your defenses and force you to reckon with a question that most entertainment actively avoids. What does sacrifice actually cost, and who is it for? The conversation between Gibson and Rogan pulled back a curtain that had been closed for 20 years. It revealed an artist who risked everything: his money, his reputation, his standing in an industry that wanted him gone, to tell a story the world tried to silence. And now, he is building something even bigger. The question is whether the world is ready to hear it this time. If you think the stories they try to silence are the ones most worth hearing, subscribe now, because this is just the beginning.